The forest was silent that night, too silent. The chilling wind whispered through the trees as Lena Walker, a 12-year-old girl, stood frozen at the sight before her. A lone, wounded wolf, its piercing golden eyes filled with desperation, limped toward her. But this was no ordinary plea. Beside the mother wolf, a tiny, lifeless cub lay motionless in the snow. Why had this wild creature sought her out? And why did those eyes seem to hold a message, a cry for help? The night was cold, with a heavy fog curling through the towering trees of Blackwood National Park. The faint hoot of an owl was the only sound breaking the eerie stillness. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, shivering as she stepped onto the porch of their secluded cabin. The rain from earlier had left the air damp, and the scent of wet pine filled her nose. Then she heard it. A low, haunting whimper carried through the trees, barely audible but full of pain. Her breath hitched. Something was out there. Lena's fingers gripped the wooden railing as she peered into the darkness. Her heart pounded. Shadows shifted between the trees. Then, golden eyes emerged from the blackness. A wolf, but not just any wolf. A massive, battle-scarred creature, its silver fur matted and streaked with dirt. The wolf limped forward, one of its legs dragging slightly. Then Lena saw the small, unmoving form lying in the snow beside it. A cub, barely breathing. Lena's stomach twisted. Her feet moved before she could stop herself. The wolf didn't snarl. It didn't run. It only stared, pleading without words. The wind howled, shaking the branches above her, but Lena barely noticed. All she could see were those eyes, desperate, weary, full of something she didn't understand. The wolf, despite its wild nature, was asking for help. Could wolves even do that? Could they trust? She swallowed hard and took a step forward. Claire Walker had seen many things in her lifetime, but a wild wolf standing at her doorstep, begging for help, was not one of them. She gasped as she rushed outside, immediately spotting her daughter kneeling beside the cub. "Lena, get away from it!" Claire's voice was sharp, filled with alarm. She grabbed her daughter's shoulders, pulling her back. But Lena didn't budge. "Mom, wait! Look at her! She's not attacking! She needs help!" Claire's breath caught as she locked eyes with the mother wolf. A deep familiarity stirred within her. "Oh my God," Claire whispered. "Lena, step back. That's Ember," Lena finished for her, realization dawning. "Mom, she knows us." Memories of Dr. Thomas Walker, Lena's father, flooded Claire's mind. Years ago, Thomas had studied wolves in these very woods. Among them, one wolf had stood out. Ember, an intelligent, strong-willed alpha female who had displayed an unusual tolerance for humans. But Thomas had vanished 2 years ago, and with him, so had Ember's pack. Until now. The question remained, why had Ember come back? And why had she brought her dying cub to them? Ember let out a soft, pained whimper, her ears flattening. Claire saw something she never expected in those golden eyes. Trust. The wolf knew them, and she was desperate. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Lena couldn't bear to see the cub suffer. Ignoring her mother's protests, she carefully scooped up the fragile creature. The tiny wolf whimpered weakly, its body cold as ice. "Lena, we don't know if—" "I don't care, Mom. I won't let him die." Something in Lena's voice made Claire pause. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples before nodding. "All right, bring him inside. But Ember stays out here." Lena turned to the mother wolf. "I promise I'll take care of him." Ember didn't move, didn't growl. She simply lowered her head, her golden eyes locked onto Lena's, as if entrusting her with something precious. Inside the cabin, Lena wrapped the cub in soft blankets and placed a warm water bottle near its frail body. She spent the next several hours feeding it small drops of milk, ensuring it stayed warm, whispering soft words of comfort. Every few minutes she glanced out the window, and each time Ember was still there, watching, a silent guardian. Outside, the mother wolf didn't move. The snow clung to her fur, her body tense, alert. She was waiting. She was trusting Lena to save her child. Later that night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the howling wind and distant rustling of the trees. Her father had always said, "Wolves don't ask for help unless something is very, very wrong." Ember had come for a reason. But what? She crept downstairs, careful not to wake her mother. The fire crackled softly in the dimly lit room. Just as she was about to return to bed, voices outside caught her attention. She froze in place. Through the cracked door, she could hear Claire talking in hushed tones with Ethan Hayes, a local park ranger. "Ethan, I know something's wrong," Claire whispered. "First Thomas disappears. Now Ember comes back, injured, desperate, and I've seen more poachers in the area. Something is happening in these woods." Lena's blood ran cold. Her father's disappearance hadn't just been an accident. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. She backed away from the door, her mind spinning. Her fingers clenched the fabric of her nightshirt as a cold realization settled in. Was Ember's return somehow connected to her father? Had Thomas known something that got him killed? Was she now in danger? Outside, Ember let out a low, sorrowful howl that sent chills down Lena's spine. She knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The night was thick with tension. The snow-covered ground shimmered under the faint glow of the moon, and the sound of the wind howling through the trees was the only thing keeping Lena from feeling completely alone. Yet she wasn't alone. Ember was still there. Lena lay awake on the couch, wrapped in a woolen blanket, her eyes fixated on the dark figure sitting at the tree line. The wolf hadn't moved for hours. Even in exhaustion, she never took her eyes off the cabin. Lena glanced at the tiny cub beside her, still weak but breathing steadily. She had done everything she could to keep it warm, but a gnawing fear remained. Was it enough? A soft knock on the cabin door startled her. She sat up, her heart hammering in her chest. It was late. Who would be visiting at this hour? She tiptoed to the door and peered out through the small window. Her mother stood just behind her, alert, sensing the tension. Outside, Ethan Hayes stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression grim. "Claire," he said in a low voice, "we need to talk." Claire stepped outside, leaving Lena peeking through the crack in the door. The cold wind sent shivers down her spine, but she ignored it. Something in Ethan's voice unsettled her. "I got word from one of my contacts," Ethan began, his breath visible in the frigid air. "You were right. Something is happening in these woods. Wolves have been going missing." He hesitated before lowering his voice. "And it's not poachers this time." Claire frowned. "Then who?" "The people responsible for Thomas's disappearance." Lena's stomach clenched. She knew it. Her father hadn't just vanished. Ethan continued. "I think Ember knows something. I think she saw what happened that night, and now they know she's back." Claire's heart pounded. "You mean they're looking for her?" Ethan gave a slow nod. "If they find her, they'll silence her, just like they silenced Thomas." Lena pressed a hand against her mouth to keep from gasping. They were in danger. Claire's mind raced. Ember hadn't just come back seeking help. She had come back running from something. Something ruthless, something dangerous. Just as Ethan finished speaking, a deep growl rumbled through the darkness. Lena turned toward the tree line. Ember had risen to her feet, her golden eyes locked onto something unseen. Her fur bristled and her ears flicked forward as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she let out a low, haunting howl. Lena had never heard a sound like it before. It wasn't just a wolf's cry into the night. It was a warning. A second later, a rustling noise echoed from beyond the trees. Heavy footsteps, more than one. Lena's blood ran cold. Someone was out there. Claire turned back to Ethan, her voice shaking. "We need to get inside, now." The next morning, Lena awoke to find Ember gone. The cub beside her stirred weakly, but his breathing was stronger than the night before. Relief washed over her, but the absence of the mother wolf filled her with unease. She hurried to the window, searching the tree line for any sign of Ember, but all she saw was untouched snow. "Mom, she's gone," Lena called out. Claire rushed over, exchanging a worried glance with Ethan. "She wouldn't have just left. She's trying to protect something, or someone. Ethan clenched his jaw. We don't have much time. If they're tracking her, we need to be ready. He turned toward Claire. You and Lena should leave the cabin. Get to safety. Lena's heart sank. We can't just leave her. She came to us for help. Claire knelt in front of her daughter, gripping her shoulders. Lena, listen to me. If these people find Ember, they'll find us. We have to be smart. Lena swallowed hard, looking down at the cub nestled in her arms. Then we take him with us. We don't leave him behind. Claire hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we move fast. The weight of their situation sank into Lena's chest. They weren't just trying to save Ember anymore. They were trying to survive. With only a small bag of essentials, Lena and Claire hurried to Ethan's truck. The engine roared to life as the sun barely peeked over the horizon. As they pulled onto the narrow forest road, Lena cast one last glance at the empty trees. Where are you, Ember? Just as they reached the outskirts of the park, a black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, following them. Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. Hold on! The tires skidded on the icy road as he floored the gas. The SUV sped up behind them, closing in fast. Lena clutched the cub tightly, her breath quick and shallow. Who are they? Ethan's voice was grim. The same people who took your father. Claire's hand went to her mouth. They know we have Ember's cub. The SUV swerved, trying to ram them off the road. Ethan cursed under his breath and yanked the wheel hard to the right. The truck veered onto an old service road, kicking up snow and dirt as they disappeared into the dense forest. For a few tense moments, nothing but silence. Then, a howl. Lena turned, eyes wide. A silver blur shot across the road behind them. Ember, the mother wolf, had returned, and she was leading the hunters away from them. Lena's hands trembled. She's sacrificing herself. Claire shut her eyes, her voice breaking. She's giving us a chance. The SUV sped past, following Ember's trail, disappearing into the woods. Lena's heart ached, torn between fear and admiration. Ember had come back for them, and now she was leading danger away to protect them. But for how long? As Ethan drove deeper into the forest, Lena made a silent promise. I won't let her fight alone. The SUV's red taillights disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the thick winter forest. The only sound left was the howling wind and the heavy breaths of those inside Ethan's truck. Lena clutched the cub close to her chest, her heart hammering. She's leading them away. We can't just let her go. Claire reached over, brushing damp hair from her daughter's forehead. She knew what she was doing, sweetheart. Ember came back to protect us. Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. We have a small window to get you both to safety. If she keeps them busy long enough, we might have a chance. Lena shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. She'll die. A heavy silence filled the truck. The truth sat between them like a weight too heavy to carry. Ember had risked everything for them, and now she was out there, alone. Ethan cleared his throat. There's a ranger station up ahead. We can regroup there. Figure out our next move. But Lena wasn't listening. She turned her gaze toward the snow-covered trees, her fingers tightening around the small cub in her arms. She had to do something. The ranger station was barely visible through the thick snowfall. Inside, the wooden cabin smelled of burning firewood and damp wool. Ethan locked the door behind them, peering through the frost-covered window. We should be safe here for now. Claire dropped onto the worn-out couch, exhausted. Lena, however, was restless. Her fingers curled into fists. This isn't right. We can't just sit here while Ember's out there, alone, being hunted. Claire's expression softened, but her voice was firm. Lena, I know how much you care, but going after her is dangerous. Those men aren't just poachers, they're killers. Lena met her mother's eyes, determination flaring. She came to us for help. What kind of people would we be if we abandoned her now? Ethan sighed. Even if we wanted to help, we don't know where she is. Lena hesitated, then looked down at the cub in her arms. He blinked up at her, his small body warm and fragile. But then something changed. His ears twitched, his nose lifted to the air, and suddenly he whimpered. Lena gasped. He can smell her. Ethan frowned. What? Lena's heart pounded. He knows where his mother is. The cub let out another soft whimper, wiggling in her grasp as if urging her to follow. Claire and Ethan exchanged glances. Claire shook her head. Number, absolutely not. You are not running into danger, Lena. But Lena had already made up her mind. She stood, pulling her coat tighter around her. Then I'll go alone. The snow crunched beneath her boots as Lena ran through the trees, her breath fogging the air. The cub nestled in her arms remained still, his small body tense but alert. She could hear Ethan and Claire calling after her, but she didn't stop. Ember had risked everything for them. Now it was her turn. The wind howled around her, but then she heard something else. Gunshots. Lena's heart slammed against her ribs. Her legs moved faster, slipping on patches of ice, branches clawing at her coat as she tore through the undergrowth. Then she saw them. The black SUV was parked just ahead, its tires half buried in the snow. 3 men stood near it, rifles in hand, their voices sharp and impatient. And beyond them, Ember.
The mother wolf stood atop a rocky outcrop, her silver fur stark against the dark sky. Her body was heaving, her left hind leg dragging slightly, but her golden eyes blazed with fury. One of the men raised his gun. Lena didn't think, she just moved. She burst from the trees, sliding down the snowbank as she threw herself between Ember and the hunters. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice raw. The men froze. The one with the gun swore under his breath. "What the? Kid, get out of here." Lena spread her arms wide, shielding Ember with her body. Her breath came in sharp gasps, but she held her ground. "You can't do this. She's not just some wild animal. She saved us." The leader of the group stepped forward. He was tall, dressed in heavy winter gear, his face hidden beneath a thick scarf. "This isn't your fight, girl. Walk away." Lena shook her head. "No." The man sighed, lowering his rifle slightly. "She's a threat. We can't let her go." Lena clenched her jaw. "You don't understand. My father, he knew Ember. He trusted her, and she trusted him. You took him from us, but I won't let you take her too." For a moment, the man hesitated. His grip on the gun loosened, then a deep guttural growl. Lena turned. Ember had stepped forward, standing beside her. A silent promise, a challenge. And then, the cub wriggled free from Lena's grasp. He stumbled forward on unsteady legs, his tiny form dwarfed by the towering men. But instead of cowering, he let out a small, determined bark. Lena's breath caught. The cub wasn't afraid, and suddenly neither was she. The leader of the hunters lowered his rifle fully, letting out a long breath. "Damn it!" The others looked at him in confusion. "What do we do?" He looked at Lena, then at Ember. Finally, he stepped back. "We walk away." Lena's knees nearly buckled. "What?" The man sighed. "That wolf is fighting for something bigger than herself. And so are you. I'm not going to be the man who takes that away." He turned to the others. "Let's go." The men grumbled but followed. Within moments, the SUV roared to life and disappeared down the road, leaving only the sound of the wind in their wake. Lena turned to Ember, tears blurring her vision. "You're safe." Ember nudged her gently before turning to her cub, licking his fur softly. A mother reunited with her child. Ethan and Claire crashed through the trees seconds later, breathless, eyes wild with panic. "Lena!" Lena laughed, throwing herself into her mother's arms. "We did it. She's safe." Claire pulled back, looking into her daughter's eyes. "You scared me to death." Ethan exhaled. "You're your father's daughter, all right?" Lena turned to Ember. The mother wolf met her gaze one last time before disappearing into the woods, free. Lena wiped her eyes, a small smile forming on her lips. Goodbye, Ember. She had saved them, and in return, Lena had saved her. Because love, true love, always comes full circle. The forest had never felt so alive. As the first light of dawn crept over the mountains, the world seemed to hold its breath. The events of the past night still hung heavy in the air, but for Lena, something had changed. She sat on the steps of the ranger station, wrapped in a thick blanket, her gaze lost in the trees where Ember had disappeared. She could still feel the warmth of the wolf's golden eyes on her, the silent promise they had shared. Claire walked up beside her, setting down 2 steaming cups of cocoa. "You haven't slept." Lena shook her head. "I don't think I can." Claire exhaled, tucking a loose strand of Lena's hair behind her ear. "You did something incredible, sweetheart. You saved them." Lena turned, her voice quiet. "Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Claire glanced toward the tree-line, her lips curving into a soft smile. "Some bonds are never broken, Lena. She knows where to find you." The little cub, safe and warm now, curled up in Lena's lap, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Lena ran a gentle hand over his soft fur, feeling the life pulsing beneath her fingertips. A life that should have been lost. A life she had fought for. Lena looked back at the sky. The sun was rising, bathing the mountains in hues of gold and crimson, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself breathe. She had done the impossible, and somehow she knew Ember had too. By midday, Ethan's truck rumbled down the mountain road, heading back toward town. The weight of exhaustion tugged at Lena's eyelids, but she refused to sleep. Her heart was too full, her mind replaying everything over and over. The way Ember had stared into her soul. The way the cub had bravely stood his ground. The way those men, hunters who lived their lives taking, had chosen, just this once, to let something live. Ethan glanced at Lena through the rearview mirror. "You did good, kid." She smirked. "I had help." He chuckled. "Your dad would be proud." The words hit her harder than she expected. Lena looked down, swallowing the lump in her throat. It was the first time in a long time she had thought about her father without pain overwhelming her. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to heal. Claire reached over, giving her hand a squeeze. "He's watching over you, Lena. I know it." Lena forced a small smile, tightening her grip on the cub resting in her lap. "And I think Ember was too." Once back in town, they faced a new question. What would happen to the cub? "He's too young to survive on his own," Ethan explained. "Normally, we'd send him to a wildlife rehab, but—" He hesitated, looking at Lena. "I think you've earned a say in this." Lena stared down at the little creature curled up in her arms. He had fought so hard to live, and he had chosen her just as she had chosen him. She lifted her chin. "We take care of him." Claire let out a breath, amused. "I knew you were going to say that." Ethan grinned. "All right then. Looks like you've got yourself a new responsibility." Lena beamed, hugging the cub close. "His name is Ash." The little wolf let out a tiny yawn, his tail flicking. It was decided. The nights that followed were quieter, but Lena always kept one ear open for the call of the wild. Ash slept by her side, growing stronger by the day, but his golden eyes still held something untamed. Then one night it happened. A sound echoed through the trees. A howl, low, haunting, familiar. Lena shot up from her bed, her heart racing. She scrambled to the window, pressing her hands against the cold glass. And there, standing at the edge of the woods, bathed in silver moonlight, was Ember. Her coat gleamed, her eyes piercing through the darkness. She stood tall, strong, whole. Lena's breath hitched. She came back. Ash stirred beside her, ears perked, sensing the presence of his mother. His tiny frame trembled, but not with fear, with recognition. Lena bit her lip, a sudden ache settling in her chest. She had known this moment would come. Ash wasn't hers to keep, not forever. But letting go was never easy. The next morning, Lena and Claire walked to the edge of the forest. Ash nestled in Lena's arms. Ethan stood nearby, giving them space but ready if they needed him. Ember waited, patient, watching. Lena knelt, gently placing Ash down in the soft snow. He hesitated, looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. Lena smiled through her tears. "Go on, little guy. Your family's waiting." For a moment, Ash lingered, as if torn between two worlds. Then he took a small, cautious step forward. Ember bent down, touching her nose to his in a silent greeting, a mother's reassurance. Then, together, they turned and melted into the trees. Lena wiped at her face, exhaling shakily. "Goodbye, Ash." Claire wrapped an arm around her, squeezing gently. "You gave him a chance. That's more than most ever get." Lena sniffed. "Do you think she'll ever come back again?" Ethan, hands in his pockets, smiled. "Wolves remember the ones who saved them." Lena looked up at the sky, watching as the golden morning sun broke through the clouds. She wasn't sad anymore, because she knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. As they turned to walk back home, a soft breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of a howl. Not a call of farewell, but a promise. Lena smiled. Ember would always be watching.